I'm going to ask Bruno to stay here. He will moderate our upcoming panel. I'll invite the panelists to come up on stage. And we enter the period of reflection towards the end of the conference. Obviously, the panelists will be reflecting on what Bruno said, but what others as well. But we're going to, just to let you know, Bruno's going to quickly go out to the audience, also to start hearing from you what you are taking away from the day, what kind of messages emerge, what kind of actions you would like to see in Europe. Bruno, over to you again.
Thank you, Peter. So I want to thank the previous speaker. Moving now into the interesting part, our panel. So this is called a reflection panel. So we are supposed to have reflected somehow before we showed up on stage, all of us. And basically, what I hope will be a discussion, including a substantive part with the audience. So be ready to come up and raise your hand, and microphones will be flying around to receive your questions to our panelists. We're supposed not only to address a specific topic, including talent mobility, but everything else that has been already addressed since the beginning of the morning, with always the same purpose, which is the purpose of the whole meeting, leading to action. Okay? What could be made better and what works? And as I'm sure you have noticed on the title of the program, what works is followed by an exclamation mark, not a question mark. Okay? So we want to celebrate somehow what's working, because I've been working for a number of years in international organizations, including the UN and the World Bank. I've learned not to say what works and what doesn't work. I've learned to say what works and what deserves improvement. So we're going to address some of the issues that may deserve improvement, and to do that, again, in what I hope will be a conversation, and I'm going to say a few words about how we're going to divide the time, we're going to proceed in the following way. I'm going to first introduce the panelists in a second, and I'm going to give them a first opportunity to make their voices heard. You've heard Ilian before, but you have not heard Vivienne and Karien. So I will start asking them a first question, and they will be expected to answer in less than 1 minute. And then I will ask each of them a deeper question for which they will have more time to answer, typically between 5 and 7 minutes, after which we should go to the interactive part and receive questions from the audience about what has been said, and probably what has not been said and you would like to hear. So the timing being described, and I'm just checking when. Yes, we have an hour. So this is how we're going to use the time. And after we have the Q&A, I'm going to turn back to each of the panelists for a last sentence they would like to leave as takeaway. A short one again. If you had one thing to remember, what should it be? And then I will wrap up the discussion. So we have, starting from my immediate right, Karien van Gennip. I hope my Dutch pronunciation is okay. CEO of ING for France, based in Paris. And before that, a member of the Dutch government. Vivienne Cox, many of you know from her days on the board and other prestigious boards as BP, as Pearson, etc., and now including Vallourec, a company close to my heart. And Ilian Mihov, who needs no introduction. You happen to be our dean, I think. Yes.
Still.
Okay. So starting with Karien, because you have, and I'm just asking the same question to each of you, and again, you have one minute to let people hear the sound of your voice. If anything wakes you up at night that concerns Europe, either because it's spectacularly good, saying, oh, we need to build on that, or it's spectacularly awful, saying, we're such a big problem, what would it be? Positive or negative?
Well, I think both positive and negative, but to start with the negative, the almost nightmare is the role of Europe at this moment. I grew up in a world where we still had a wall in Berlin, and with a great inheritance of my parents and my great-parents about peace and prosperity that Europe brings. Today it feels almost as if that role is fading away. When we look at what's happening in the last couple of years, we are at crossroads. We really are at crossroads with geopolitical challenges, with an economic crisis. And it seems that we are unable to speak with one voice. And if we look at the debate today, I'm really concerned by the debate about immigration, because to me it feels that's one that can break the European Union. At the same time, when I wake up and I think about Europe, I'm also quite proud at how far we are. We are a collection of countries that have developed into one Europe, with the same set of values that we are now so dearly trying to defend. And that's not just peace and prosperity, it's also personal freedom. It's healthcare for everybody. It's education for all the children. There are so many things that are at stake at the moment that we take for granted. But if we want to create a society, a Europe for our children, that's the same society as I inherited from my parents, there's a lot of work to be done.
Thank you. So proud that European has values, well recognized, and concerned that we cannot express them as often as necessary with one single voice. Vivienne, your nightmare and best dreams.
I think Karien and I must have been sharing the same brand of coffee, because my nightmare is along similar lines. I don't worry about Brexit or Grexit. I don't think they're a good idea, but I think we could manage them. What I worry about is Europe dissolving because there isn't sufficient shared values, shared understanding, shared citizenship with a shared vision that actually people are prepared to put their energy and leadership behind. And that's not just politicians, it's about businesses and it's about civil society as well. And the reason it's important to me, it's the things Karien talked about, but it's also the fact that after the Second World War, when the population of the world was 2.5 billion, there were 500 million in Europe. Today, the population of the world is 7.5 billion, and there are 500 million in Europe. We have no choice but to keep Europe as a single entity if, as business people, we want to be successful operating from Europe.
So, thank you. So, beat only on the basis of arithmetics, it's even more important to have a united voice in Europe right now. Ilian, your main concerns?
Well, I think that what works in Europe still, I think it was in your charts, I think that human capital development is working well. I've said this before that in my view, if you look in the long term, one encouraging sign is that Europe has the highest concentration of human capital per person or per square kilometer. And I think that's important. At the same time, I think that we should not be complacent, because what has worked in the past and so far may not be necessarily helpful in the future. I think that we need to rethink how talent development should be done going forward. What doesn't work, what is worrisome, I completely agree with Karien and with Vivienne about this high-level fear of disintegration. But I think that also at a more economic point of view, I think that there is a continuous drift between governments and business. And I think that this is something that, I live in Singapore, most of you probably don't know that, but in Singapore, it seems that the government is understanding a little bit better what creates value and how to support business to create this value. So, I mean, we can elaborate more because you said only 30 seconds, so I've run out of my 30 seconds and I don't want to have a lecture now, so I'll just stop here.
Thank you. So the talent is there. What can be done indeed to enhance this magic that we see in other parts of the world, like Singapore, for a better connection between government and business? Maybe this is a question I'd like to keep as it is, as Ilian formulated, because Karien, you have had your government experience and now your business experience. So do you think this is something that governments must lead in Europe? And we heard that different definitions of that, or is that something that business should lead? Is there a magic recipe we should try to seek there?
Well, there's certainly no magical recipe. It's a lot of hard work. But I think it can only be done, whatever we want to achieve, if we do it together. Government and businesses together. When I was in government, I heard a lot of criticism on the business world. Now that I'm back in business, I was in business before as well, I hear a lot of criticism on the government. And some of the criticism is right. Some is not, some is exaggerated, but from both sides, I think we should leave the criticism behind us and try to join forces to actually do what's necessary. And there's so many things that need to be addressed. And whether that's the deregulation that was talked about before, to keep the good regulation, but get rid of the regulation that's really on top of things, too much of it. But if you look at the great challenges that we face today, it's not for a government or a business to solve on its own. Sustainability. I'm living in Paris now. The COP21 is there in a couple of weeks. It cannot be done just by governments. Governments can set policies, they can set minimum standards, but in the end it's businesses that drive the innovations that we need to actually create a more sustainable world. And of course then the whole debacle with Volkswagen doesn't really help for the belief of governments in what business is doing. At the same time, innovation, that's a place where governments invest in education. Governments can create innovative sons, but in the end, it's businesses that dare to invest in an innovative idea, or entrepreneurs that dare to invest their time, their money, and dare to maybe go broke once in a while, because that's a big difference with some other regions in the world. Do we actually value entrepreneurship as much as we do that in, for instance, the States? When you go broke, when you fail your company, do you have a stamp on your forehead for the rest of your life that you failed? Or were you highly risk-taking, you saw opportunities and you went for it? And maybe you will do it again with all the experience you build up during that very difficult phase. So if you look at just those two examples, sustainability and innovation, neither businesses nor government can do it alone. And then if we ask the question, why are we doing all this? Why do we want innovation? Why do we want economic growth? We want innovation for sustainability, for better healthcare solutions. Maybe just because we want to challenge the old-fashioned business models by some business model changes. We want economic growth because we want jobs and education. But in the long run, we need it just plainly because businesses generate revenues generate taxes. And with those taxes, we're able to pay for the doctors and the school teachers for our children and the police agents. And if we can't afford anymore to pay for that, and if we can't afford anymore to innovate, we run the serious risk for Europe to become a great tourist destination. The Eiffel Tower in Paris, I see all the Chinese visiting it. The tulips in the Netherlands, the same. But do we want to be more than just a tourist destination? Do we want to be a force in the world? And do we want to be able to innovate again so that actually the Europe of our children is going to be a better Europe than the Europe today? That, I think, is the question at the table for us, for this generation today.
Thank you. Already some very provocative thought. I'm particularly happy to hear your insistence on the necessity for Europe to stay an innovative part of the world. And clearly, your point about the right to fail, respect for failure, links back to what we heard just from the previous panel. One of my favorite thinkers about innovation is Woody Allen, because he said, if you're not failing from time to time, it's probably that you're not doing something very innovative. So one cannot go without the other. What is important is not to repeat, of course, the mistakes you've made. And I had another colleague from the World Bank who said, the important is not to repeat the mistakes you've made. I try to make a new mistake every day, which is another guiding principle. Vivienne, because you've been active on with the boards and with so many global companies. You also have this worldwide vision of Europe as it can be seen from the outside. We heard this afternoon from Frédéric and the experience of BlaBlaCar. Basically, I'm hardly paraphrasing. If you can make it in Europe, you can make it everywhere because you have such a fragmented market, you have so many hurdles. Indeed, if you survive that, you can be a global competitor. Is it your feeling that indeed one of the big hurdles in Europe is this fragmentation, or is it also the diversity that can be seen as a source of indeed competitiveness and innovation?
It can be both, but I think the fragmentation of the labour force, of the regulatory environment, we heard it in the last presentation, of the fiscal environment around Europe, makes doing business across Europe much more complicated. It probably does mean that if you're successful, you can do it anywhere, but I do think it is a drag on for companies, European companies, trying to compete globally. And I'll just give you one example from my Vallourec experience. So unlike all those extremely exciting business ideas we heard of this morning, Vallourec is in steel. It makes seamless stainless steel pipes that get used in the oil and gas industry. So Vallourec has a double challenge, steel, oil and gas at the moment. It has a third challenge. Its biggest customer is actually Petrobras. So we are struggling with a number of challenges at the moment. And that's meaning that we're really having to respond to dramatically lower order books. And by that I mean 60% reduction in orders in the US and in Europe. And when you're talking about heavy industry with steel plants, with a workforce, often a unionized workforce in Europe, then compare the responsiveness of our business in the US with the responsiveness of our business in Europe to deal with that situation. In the US, the reduction in volume, 60% reduction in volume, the fixed costs were reduced by 60% within 2 months. So a full absorption of the variable cost reduction. In Europe, 18 months later, we still have not yet launched our social plan. And that means, and what frustrates me is that the social plan was put in place to protect people, and yet in my opinion it's doing the opposite. It is making life more uncertain for people because they don't know whether they're going to have a job or not. And that actually means that the long-term chance of those plants remaining in business is lower. So I find it very frustrating that we're reducing the competitiveness of Europe and we're making things less good for the people who work for us. So I think there's something to be done there. But I'm sure it does mean that when we respond to that, actually, and we've resized the business in Europe, actually we'll be able to pull upon what are highly talented, highly technically trained, and actually very flexible workers as a workforce. So once we get the size right of that business, I'm sure that we can then bring to Europe all of the more technical work that actually will be done as well, if not better in Europe than elsewhere.
Thank you for these inspiring words. It can be done even better in Europe than elsewhere. Ilian, you whetted our appetite, saying you could give us a whole lecture on the role of government, and I'd like to go back to that. Do we have real examples where governments has really led the way in productive ways? Should we expect more Europe to play the trick in Europe, or is it something where business needs to have more freedom, more possibility to put its energy in turning Europe into a more competitive place?
Well, I think that when we say that there is this distance, the previous panel was discussing the increasing regulation and all these things, but we have to ask ourselves, why is regulation increasing and why we see it more and more as a burden for the companies? And I think that and maybe later on we'll touch upon this as well. There is a big mistrust between the government and the business, and recent examples do not help. The way that governments have decided to react is by punishing everybody for the sins of very few. And that's certainly not helpful. In my view, the most challenging, the fundamental problem is that we lack long-term perspective on things. And this is connected to the first thing that I said in the beginning, that today talent is working in Europe, human capital, all these indicators are really great. But do we know what kind of people we'll need 20, 30 years from now? Do we know what we need to teach them in school? About a year and a half ago, one board member asked me, what keeps you awake at night? And of course, the classical answer is, traffic keeps me awake at night. But if you think a little bit harder, we are training people who will go out there and they'll be managers, leaders, entrepreneurs for the next 10, 20, 30, 50 years, maybe. What skills do they need? And the reason that I'm saying this is because a government that I think is thinking about these things, again, I know Singapore very well, they have actually a committee that works on the future of work, producing reports, thinking what are the skills that we need to develop today in our kids at the high school level, at the primary school level, at the university level, so that they're competitive, they have the talent that is needed 20, 30 years from now. And I think that somehow, maybe there are examples that I'm not aware of, but in Europe we see many politicians thinking between one election and the next election. And I think that's a big problem. So when you don't have the long-term perspective for development, then you start reacting with more regulation, with, let's try to make sure that everybody is stable and secure. But of course, more security, more stability, more constraints mean slower growth. It's a standard risk-return trade-off. So I think that what I would like to see in Europe is really a conversation from people from the government who understand business. And I'm not sure how many governments have these people. I'm not sure, I'm very impressed that Karien was as an MP with an MBA. How many in other countries you have that are at that level? In Singapore, the Chief of Defense Forces is an INSEAD MBA from 2006. Virtually everybody from the government, one way or another, has gone to a business school. And not necessarily to INSEAD. Some of them could come to INSEAD, others not. But we have 2 programs for the Economic Development Board of Singapore. 2 programs that come to INSEAD and we go. And it's not that maybe we teach them management skills, leadership skills, but the most important skills that they learn is how businesses work. So then when they start regulating, when they start implementing policies, they can see also the other side. And I think that this is very important. And this is important then, just to finish, because we have all this talent in Europe, very, very smart people, many of them leaving Europe. In order to prepare these countries and the continent for the future, we have to create vibrant environments. We have to be able to say, there must be some rules of the game, obviously, but at the same time, there must be enough freedom so that the entrepreneurial spirit flourishes. And I don't see these conversations. I see the tension between the business is bad, the business says the governments are bad, the public says the business is bad and the government is bad, so everybody is bad. And these dynamics are not certainly helpful.
Thank you. Karien, you wanted to pick back on this?
Maybe to add something on the trust. It's a bit strange that we are always saying that Europe is a trust-based society, much more so than other regions in the world. But we see actually that the trust is decreasing. And it's not just trust in business, or trust in politicians, or trust in bankers. It's also trust in the local doctor. If you now talk to, and it's not just people on the street, if you talk to middle-class people, they have lost their trust in institutions. So it is much broader than just politics or business. It's this common trust in whether we have leadership. and whether it's our neighbor or our doctor, who can actually help us through a difficult couple of years. And probably the distrust between government and business at this moment is multiplied by the distrust of the common people, but the common people are we all, the voters, the consumers, the distrust of the middle class in Europe in institutions.
Can I carry on with that point? Because I think it's a really important point. And I was very struck by the comment made this morning from the CEO of Blah Blah, who said that the mechanism he had to make people feel secure, which was a fully digital mechanism, actually generated almost as much trust as friends and families. And I thought that was really interesting. And in the context of what you're saying, we probably have to rethink the way in which we engage with citizens and we actually get the voice in, and that's true in the workplace as well. There was also a comment about generating values collectively. People don't want to be told anymore. Nope. And so we have to find a different way of bringing them into the helping them to be able to create some of the answers so that the solutions that are generated, people trust in. Because if we carry on with the same mechanisms, that trend that you've described, I think, will just continue.
Thank you. Thank you all. So I promised we would go to the interactive part of the discussion. So there are microphones, and I'm expecting a few hands to be raised. And before we move, just to, I can't refrain because the Ilian quoted the spirit in which we are collaborating in Singapore with the Economic Development Bureau, for instance, EDB. I was struck by the working with both the EDB in Singapore and the European Commission in Brussels, because both are concerned about the future of work. But the way they address it is radically different. The way in which the European Commission looks at the future of work is to start with a typology of occupations, saying this is how many programmers we're going to need in 5 years. This is how many engineers we're going to need. Or we are going to have too many cooks or too many plumbers or whatever. So they look at the deltas and they try to think of the right policies to address these deltas. EDB has a totally different way of looking at it. The first questions they ask is, in 5 years from now, what is the jobs that we cannot think of today because they don't exist? And let's see how important they're going to be. So, and I think this is quite symptomatic of the degree of agility that we can expect from the public sector, because the closer they are to the private sector, the greater degree of agility they tend to develop. It's my own limited experience of working with both Brussels and Singapore. On the point of view of agility, Karien, you mentioned the fact that a number of decisions can be made, and depending on where the trust level is. One thing we have discovered working on the talent index is that much of the talent policies and strategies is not developed at national level. It is increasingly developed at the level of cities and regions. Yep. And this is why next year we're going to actually extend the GDCI to include some provincial and city-based reflections. But it's probably an area that would be very interesting for research, to see what is the geographical scope or maybe the number of people beyond which a trust level can be developed easily. Because in terms of innovation, it's critically important. Just some additional reflection. So, questions? We have one hand raised, I see two, and one in the back. So could we get the microphone? So as before, if you can quickly introduce yourself.
Hi, Phil Cantor from IGTB in the banking sector. So talking about trust. Terrible, isn't it? I'm guilty, I admit. So we heard about I think people said there was no recipe for success, but then we were told you mustn't benchmark against the past. We were told, if you want prosperity for 100 years, develop people. And we were told that localization and country cultural sensibilities are important. Somebody also mentioned the word luck. So my questions to the panel are around, now be ruthlessly honest, looking back at success and failures in all of our lives, is it really skill or is it luck? And on the assumption that success comes from skill and failure comes from bad luck, how do we make this luck happen? How do we control luck? How much impact are we really having?
Thank you. So who wants to
No,
take the luck issue?
for the Dutch people in the audience, and now I have to think about Johan Cruyff, famous Dutch soccer player. Well, you all know him, but he's also quite famous for many of his sayings. And one of his sayings is quite interesting because he was asked a question once in a program, and he always has these answers that you can't follow. But then in the end, you remember one sentence, and it was also about luck. So why do you always score? Are you so lucky? And then he said, you have to shoot to be able to score.
And I don't know whether it was him or someone else who said, the more I practice, the luckier I am.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's the same. Yeah.
No, I don't think there is much to add to this. I think that I think that you create the environment for your luck to find you. I really think that very often when you look at people who are successful, you realize that not that they had the opportunity. Many other people had these similar opportunities, but they were really they grasped it and they prepared. So I fully agree with this. That you have to train and to prepare and then grab it when it comes.
And then maybe back to the role of governments. Having been in the government when I hear all this, it is the role, the responsibility of the government to create that environment where people can become lucky, and where they can train themselves, where they can actually really do their best. But it's our responsibility as well to help the governments create that. Because just to compare the European Commission, what they're not agile about, with Singapore, which is really agile, then there is a responsibility for us, if we say that, to go to the European Commission and say, hey guys, maybe we should do this differently. Because just commenting upon it, I find it's a bit too easy. Then let's take it upon ourselves to actually go to the European Commission or our governments or our regional governments, our cities, and say, I have another idea. I think if you want to succeed as the city of Paris, where I now live, or whoever, you have to do this, this, and this. And I've thought about it, I have a program, because just criticizing governments, it won't fly. It's not going to help us succeed in the next decade.
Thank you for raising that point, because it's a very provocative question. I do believe, like all of us, that indeed good luck and bad luck is largely self-made. But I do strongly agree with you, Karien, that governments can create the conditions to increase the probability of good luck. And it's something we've seen in our own work on the Innovation Index, that there is something which is very... INSEAD is very special because people come with professional experience, so they come from various avenues of life. So you have medical doctors, you have engineers, you have people with different experiences. So diversity, in addition to the multi-campus concept, is embedded in the institution. But one great superiority of US campuses compared to most European campuses is cross-disciplinarity. So when you have something that we could call engineered serendipity, where you're sitting in the cafeteria in Cambridge or in Stanford, and you're studying electrical engineering, and you have somebody on your right who studied compared religion, and somebody is studying linguistics on your left, this is where innovation takes place. So these are the kind of conditions that create luck. You cannot anticipate, you don't know how it's going to work, but you know that you increase the probability. We had another hand raised in, yes, next in the same area, and then I will come back to you.
Yeah, Franz Obermeier, INSEAD 79. I find it very intriguing that finally at the end of the whole thing, the role of government and the theme education comes together. What I feel that there's very little education in terms of politics. I mean, our politicians normally come to office by very different ways, and I always have the feeling that they don't really have the intensity of professional education. I mean, politics, to my experience, to some extent also is not just being elected, but also being a professional and knowing how things come together, businesses and employers and employees and the normal man on the street and infrastructure and everything. But I have the feeling there's no such thing as a business school for the government. How do you think about that?
I guess that's to me the question. I think you're absolutely right. And first of all, politics is a profession as well. Sometimes we think about it too easily. You know, you just go into politics or you have an opinion about politics and why don't we do it this way? And then, like I did, you learn the hard way when you're from business suddenly into politics. You actually have to get your law or your, I did regional policy by the way, regional policy through the parliament, get it voted on. It's hard work. It takes you a year and a half to get everybody aligned, to get the ones who agree with you on your side so that you just have that majority and you get it through. So it's a profession and you have to have patience. You have to have patience to actually see it through, but then you can really have a huge impact. The changes you can make when you can actually change the law are enormous. But how do you get people to actually, one, go into politics and then be well prepared? That's an answer, that's a question I don't have an answer to yet. What I've done over the past couple of years, I've given a series of master classes for people who are contemplating to go into politics, just to prepare them a little bit about what they can expect. But that's not enough. Political parties usually don't have HR management, talent management like we have in larger companies, like I was used to before and I have now. And maybe that's something where, you know, as businesses, we can help political parties to be a better, talent manager. And once you have a young member of parliament, how are you going to actually help that person succeed? When you have a seasoned politician, how can that person not be, you know, with the next elections be shoved aside, but be the coach, the mentor to the younger people? In some political parties, you have that a little bit, but it's self-organized. It's not constant. So if you have an HR background and if there's a political party in your country that you feel, you know, attached to, I would say, go help.
I think that just very quick answer. I think that's a very good question. The sad thing is that this is a question that we heard 3 years ago at the conference, the first GBLC in Paris. And then at the time, as we were summarizing the end with Peter and one other dean, somebody said INSEAD should create courses for politicians. And my response was, if they want to come, we'll teach them for free. You know, it's our contribution to the society. But nobody wants to come. Because again, they know it all. You know, they've graduated from these top schools in public administration and so on. So why would they go to a business school? I think that the mentality is very different. Not in every country. I don't want to generalize, but in certain countries you can see it very, very clearly. We know everything. There is no need, even though we teach skills which should be useful also for politicians. You know, HR management and negotiations and communication and all these things which would be useful for them, in addition to understanding how business works. So we are very much ready again to say 3 years later that we'll be happy to create courses for politicians. By the way, the European Commission is different from national governments. The national governments, I think, are the ones that need a little bit more education. The European Commission has funding that they have attributed to going to business schools. So they send a lot of people, a lot of the bureaucrats there go to business schools. For one reason or another, they decide to go to the US, even though it's a European Commission, not to INSEAD. But that's a different story. So.
But let's try again.
Mm-hmm. Sorry?
Let's try again.
Yeah. Yeah. So here is the offer. You know? Bring us your politicians and we'll be very happy to have them in our classroom.
So given the amount of time which is little and left, I will pick another 3 questions we have here, group them and then ask who on the panel is ready to address them. So we had a lady over there who had her hand up for a little while. We have many hands right now. So if I can ask you to ask quick questions so we can hear as much as possible from the audience.
I'll try to. Sophie Bertin, MBA 2002. My question, actually, one of the observations I have is that we're talking about customers, but the customers of politics are the people who elect the politicians. And what I observe is that actually there is a lot of bashing between politics and business instead of joining hands at explaining to the public what is happening. And in a demographics where we have an aging population, people want more safety. The voters actually want more safety because the younger voters don't vote. The older ones vote and they want more safety. And they are delighted at the bashing between politics and business. And what you also observe as well in our societies in Europe is that the revolving doors between politics and business are very badly seen. We live in a society where it's not good to move from politics to business and vice versa. Whereas in Singapore, it's a completely different matter. So actually, my question is, and it goes along what has already been said before, how to go together, hand in hand, business and politics, to explain to the public what it is all about and how to make it better and to get more voters, especially the young voters, to vote so that this can change.
Thank you. Gentleman on the right over there. And then I will take one more after this one and address all three questions to the panel. Yeah.
Arul Ramadurai. I work in biotech in Switzerland. I have a question. It's a bit of a provocative question, but just a couple of weeks ago in Switzerland, the Healthcare Club, we ran an event which was focused on talent. So it was quite encouraging to see some of the talent scores from the competitiveness index here. I think Switzerland does obviously relatively well. And we talked about some of the winners in this space, what's important for talent nowadays, and we talked about some of the traits and values. But we also focused on two things in this discussion. One was really around how the managers of the future need to have a different level of learning agility. That was one thing that was talked about. And the second thing that was talked about was diversity. So having the diverse mindset, which is one of the things I think in INSEAD we pride ourselves on. Having said that, it's interesting that today, if I just look at the speakers, we have around 20 speakers, of which there are only 3 women. Why is that the case? That's 15%. My INSEAD promotion 10 years ago had 18% women. I understand it's changing now, which is good. But in the context of what works in Europe and what needs improvement, maybe there is a question mark there.
And I promise the hand in the back over there has been up for some time as well.
Thank you. I have a comment and a question. My name is Sandeep Sander. I have recently moved from Denmark to Singapore, and I feel I dare to compare the two. It's about 5 million people in each, and as you know, Denmark is functioning quite well, but compared to Singapore, there's a lot of room for improvement. For example, in Singapore, there is an institute for employability. And I think this is a really show of strength, that instead of taking care of people who are unemployed, the government of Singapore and the business society of Singapore have built in that in addition to having work and getting paid for it, everyone is getting an upgrade as they do the work. And my question to the panel is, how do you think we in Europe can get closer to employability and in this way make a contribution towards what Ilian talked about, being on the forefront and being proactive instead of being reactive? Thank you.
So thank you very much. So this is the opportunity to give us your parting shot as panelists. So we have had 3 questions. Just one right now about the inspiration we could get from what is happening in Singapore. We have the question about diversity, and I want to stress, looking at what works, that this is the more gender balanced panel you've seen so far. So we should be congratulated for this. And the question on how could business and government get together to actually convince public opinions that they can do something better for the voters. So any of these questions, and if you can encapsulate it in a way that this audience will remember it as a signal where action can be taken. So let me start again with Karien.
Yeah, on the first question, the way the question was phrased, if I may say so, struck a chord with me in the sense that that's, sorry to say, a bit old-fashioned. Explain to voters. I think in the financial industry, we hopefully by now have learned that we're not telling our customers anymore what they want. We're co-creating now. We're having people taking their own decisions. Hopefully, that goes for the whole financial industry. And there's still a lot to learn. But also for voters, I think if you try to explain them something, you're deemed to fail. I was part of the government when we had the vote on the European Union. We failed miserably, basically because we were trying to explain to people what it was, instead of really listening and trying to make them understand together. On younger voters, I think there is really something there. It's for all voters. The concerned citizen, if you talk about child labor earlier today, the concerned citizen is somebody else than the calculating consumer buying a t-shirt, and is somebody else again than the voter. One of the things that happened in the Netherlands after the MH17 was shot down over the Ukraine a summer ago was that suddenly interest in politics and engagement from different types of voters shot up. And why? Because suddenly our own security was at stake. So when there is something at stake, people usually get more engaged. And this was a very negative thing, of course, but suddenly younger people, because they all had families and friends on vacation to Asia being shot down over the Ukraine. So suddenly all these young people were engaged. It's gone down again after that. But moments like that, never waste a good crisis, try to turn them into engagement, I think is one of the things we need to learn better as companies and as governments. On diversity, I can only agree. There have been so many studies now that diverse companies perform better. There have been so many discussions now. And I've come a long way from saying, if I just do my best, I started my work at McKinsey many years ago, I'll be treated the same as all the men in the room. And it was just 2 or 3 years down the road that one of the CEOs sat me down one evening and said, I'm looking at diversity in my own company. Can you help me understand? I said, there's not an issue. He said, well, there is an issue. Because you're a woman, I look at you differently. Sorry. And I'm actually, pro-diversity, but there are a lot of guys out there who are not. But all these discussions, having had them for the last 25 years, I'm done with it. And I just say to all the old guys, sorry, on the board, do it. And if you need to quote them to do it, do it. Because my patience is running out with all this discussion about are we ready for female leadership? Are there female talents out there? Yes, they're out there. I better hope you're ready for female leadership. It's going to happen anyhow. So why not go for it?
Vivienne, your predicament for action.
Thank you. So on the first question, I absolutely agree with you. It's not about telling people. I think it is about using new technology. It's about getting people's voices heard. I think one of the problems today is actually the soundbite politics. So the notion that, if you can give your message in 30 seconds, people will hear you. And it works quite well for some sides of the political equation. I think all that is some of the rise of the nationalist politics that we're seeing in countries, it's much easier to give a negative message in 30 seconds than it is to explain to somebody why we really have to stay in the European Union and why it's really good for all of us. So I think ways of actually extending the debate and using new media in order to do that, I think is really powerful. And I think there's real hope with the younger voters. I mean, I've seen what's happened in the UK with the vote on Scottish devolution. It engaged the whole of the Scottish electorate. And they're still engaged now in UK politics, and it's created a level of personal involvement that I think we can capitalize on, and we must capitalize on if we want some of the more sensible ideas to be put forward and heard in order that we can counter some of the more negative nationalistic politics that is coming forward. In terms of the issue of diversity, so I agree with you, we're coming, you better get on with it. Yeah. But I do think there's another dimension to this. I don't understand why it's a woman's problem. I don't understand why it's the women who have to go on training courses. I think maybe it's the other way round. And then finally, the point about employability, and there are some. I sit on the board of Pearson, which is an education company. Pearson does a lot, I think, with INSEAD. I think there's a lot that's being done around the next generation of education that integrates best-in-class understanding of what works and what doesn't with new technology. And I think that's a wonderful opportunity to educate people for the world of work, to educate them to be better citizens, to educate them to be better business people. And if I had sort of one final message, I think the notion of business as a force for good is absolutely right. And in the light of the scandals at VW and so on, all of us who are business people have to work extra hard to prove to governments and to society that business is genuinely a force for good and the only way, as you said, Ilian, of actually creating long-term economic value.
Well, I'm very happy to hear this, certainly. I think that just starting from this, I think that somehow when we started talking about business as a force for good, I realized that business has been on the defense, trying to explain what they're doing, why they're doing this, and actually most of the time keeping quiet. Most people do not understanding something very simple, that there is no increase in economic welfare, there are no improvements. Even if we talk about sustainability, it has to be the government, certainly, but at the end of the day, the solutions will be driven by the business and so on. So I think that somehow this message has to go out. I don't know how, but it has to go out that if we want to improve the state of the world, business is an integral part of this solution. Now, going back to the questions, I think that for the governments and business working together to educate the voters, I think that actually, as an economist, I look at the incentives and I'm thinking, what are the incentives of the politicians? Most of the time, sadly, you see the incentives being re-election rather than anything else. And when you have this, or election if they're not in power. And when this is your incentive, very often you tend to use arguments or you tend to propose things that might not be necessarily in the long run interest of the country, but they could be serving you well in winning the election. So for me, trying to understand the interaction between voters and governments and politicians has to go back first to the incentives. How do you actually generate a long-term perspective for the politicians so that then they have the incentive to explain or to work with the population for this long-term success. Now, the two questions about the learning agility and the employability, I think are very much related, and that's what Vivienne was referring to what Pearson is doing. Here is one proposal for Europe, which I think will be very, very useful if we implement it somehow. I think that we have to start talking seriously about lifelong learning, because lifelong learning is becoming a necessity as a result of the technological changes that we see, as a result of a very dynamic economies where your job description is changing basically every 2 years, every 3 years. We're still, I think, that in the mindset that, okay, you go to school, you go to university, you're educated, now go and work. Well, from time to time you may go to a management course if you're a manager, but most people just go and work because you've learned whatever you had to learn. And this model is not going to work anymore. We see how it was mentioned, Bruno mentioned that doctors become less relevant, lawyers become less relevant. So how do you work for employability of people that transition and will be transitioning? And I think that this is actually quite exciting. I think that we can do that because it presents a very interesting problem. How do you think about the future career trajectories and how they change? And then how do you design learning platforms for this very dynamic environment? And I think that if we do this, we'll be very successful in pushing Europe further. And of course, I want to finish with diversity. INSEAD thrives on diversity. Mostly it is national ethnic diversity, not as much gender diversity. I think that today we are at the highest level in the history of INSEAD with 33% women, also 32%. And I looked at it, actually I looked at it 5 years ago, not 5, 8 years ago, we had the Gender Diversity Initiative. I was a member of that group. And I started looking at it, why do we have so few women? And it turns out that somehow we don't have enough applicants from Europe. In the United States, in our US, we have about 100 students coming from the US every year. In the US cohort, we have more or less the same percentage of women that you would see in other US schools, about 40, 42, 45%, not at 50 yet. China, 60% women. So there are regions where you have more women than men applying to INSEAD or coming to INSEAD. But in Europe, Italy, 12%. So for us, the big question is how do you actually create the incentives, how do you create the marketing program, if you wish, to attract women and to show that this is actually a trajectory, a career, which is worth pursuing and it is rewarding. And I think that the best way to do this is by using examples. So I would ask Karien and Vivienne to stand out and to go and to convince more women to come to INSEAD, because I think that that will be the solution.
So thank you. So I will not try to summarize the discussion first because we have no time, and I think the last statement we heard were very clear. I just would like to, however, stress the importance of our events team. You see the signals, etc., but you may not have noticed that actually the summary of this session was already posted before you entered this room. It is contained in the tapestry you have at the top. What you see there is Europe. At the very top, in the official tribune, you have the government's people who are watching and ready to change the rules. In the middle, you have business, which is fighting it out and competing. On the right side, you have the INSEAD faculty who has trained these people, is watching how they are doing and standing ready to give additional advice. The guy who is lying on the floor on the left is the one who didn't have the right business model. And the guy who is running on the side is Ilian Mihov, who brings the latest version of the rankings.
Thank you,
So,
Bruno.
thank
Our
you.
panelists. All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Lovely, lovely,
Thank you.
lovely.
Wonderful.
Vivienne, always a pleasure. Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
Karien.
for this.